A wrong turn in Sarajevo sparked World War I in 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo in 1914. Tensions were already high in the region, and several assassins had been positioned along his planned motorcade route. The first few attempts failed. But then, something unexpected happened. His driver took a wrong turn. By pure coincidence, one of the would-be assassins, Gavrilo Princip, happened to be standing on that very street, having given up and stopped for a sandwich. The car stalled just a few feet away. Princip took the opportunity and shot the Archduke and his wife. That moment triggered a diplomatic crisis between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, and because of a network of alliances, the situation spiraled out of control. Within weeks, the world's major powers were at war. Over 16 million people would die, all because of a small navigational mistake. A mathematical mistake sparked a nuclear explosion. In April 1986, engineers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine ran a late-night safety test on Reactor 4. The goal was simple: simulate a power outage to see if backup turbines could take over. But the test began to go wrong when the reactor was low on power and warning alarms started to go off. Still, none of that should have caused an explosion if the reactor had been properly designed. Decades earlier, when the RBMK reactor design was created, Soviet engineers used a mathematical model to simulate how the reactor would behave in different scenarios. But that model was flawed. It didn't fully capture what would happen during a rapid shutdown at low power. Specifically, it failed to predict that the graphite-tipped control rods, meant to stop the reaction, would actually cause a short, dangerous spike in energy when inserted. Here's the twist. Another, more accurate model existed. It correctly predicted this behavior, but it was finished too late to influence the design. The lead researcher who developed it died shortly afterward before he could push for changes. His junior colleagues raised concerns, but they didn't have the influence to challenge the official version. So, the flawed model remained in use. And on the night of the test, the operators had no idea that pressing the shutdown button could trigger a runaway reaction. A small error in the math, a missed chance to correct it, and a design flaw that led to the worst nuclear disaster in history. A misnamed continent, how America got its name. When Columbus sailed west in 1492, he reached the Americas, but he thought he'd landed near Asia. Over the next decade, other explorers realized these were new continents. One of them was Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian navigator who sailed along the coast of South America and argued that this was, in fact, a new world. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller was putting together a new world map. He read Vespucci's letters and was convinced, incorrectly, that Vespucci had discovered the continent before Columbus. So, he labeled the new land America in his honor. Later, Waldseemüller realized his mistake and tried to revise it. But by then, copies of the map had already spread. The name stuck. And today, an entire hemisphere is named not after the first European to arrive, but after the man who wrote the better press release. A small error in attribution, a misread timeline, and a name that shaped the global order. A lost codebook brought America into World War I. In early 1917, World War I was raging across Europe. Germany was desperate to keep the United States out of the fight, but it wanted a backup plan in case the US did in fact join the war. So they came up with a bold plan: send a secret telegram to Mexico proposing a military alliance. If the US joined the war, Germany would help Mexico reclaim Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. But it had to all be a secret to avoid provoking the US unnecessarily. That message, the Zimmermann telegram, was meant to be unbreakable. It was encrypted with one of Germany's top military ciphers. But here's the twist. The British had already cracked that cipher, thanks to a mistake made 2 years earlier. In 1915, during a failed German mission to Afghanistan called the Niedermeyer-Hentig expedition, a German agent named Wilhelm Wasmus had to flee. In his rush, he abandoned his codebook, the same one used to encrypt the Zimmermann message. British intelligence recovered it and quietly began decoding future messages. So, when the infamous telegram was sent to the German ambassador in Mexico, British cryptographers at Room 40 intercepted and decrypted it. They passed it to the US, and when the message was made public, Americans were outraged. Public opinion shifted overnight. Just weeks later, the United States entered the war. The balance of power tipped, and Germany's chances of victory collapsed. A codebook abandoned by a careless agent helped push America into the Great War. A dirty lab dish that changed modern medicine. In 1928, a Scottish scientist called Alexander Fleming returned to his cluttered lab after a 2-week vacation. On one of his benches sat a petri dish he'd forgotten to clean. It had been left uncovered, exposed to the open air, and was now clearly contaminated. The kind of thing most researchers would toss in the trash without a second thought. But something was off. This wasn't just any mold. Around it, the colonies of staph bacteria he'd been growing had disappeared. Not just thinned out, completely gone. As if the mold had killed them on sight. The dish looked ruined, but the scene told a different story. So he leaned in, took notes, and began testing. The mold turned out to be Penicillium notatum, and what it produced, by total accident, would go on to save hundreds of millions of lives. It was the first true antibiotic, and its discovery launched the era of modern medicine. One messy petri dish led to the discovery of penicillin, the world's first antibiotic, a misstatement that brought down the Berlin Wall. In November 1989, East Germany was under intense pressure. Mass protests, emigration through Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and a crumbling economy were shaking the regime. To calm things down, the East German government decided to ease travel restrictions between East and West Berlin. On November 9th, government spokesman Günter Schabowski was handed a press release just minutes before a live TV briefing. He hadn't been fully briefed and misunderstood the wording. When asked when the new travel policy would go into effect, Schabowski glanced at his notes and casually said, "As far as I know, effective immediately, without delay." That was not the plan. The policy was supposed to be phased in with documentation checks and border control. But millions of East Berliners watching TV thought the wall was now open. That evening, thousands flooded the checkpoints demanding to cross. The guards were confused. They had no orders, no reinforcements, and no way to stop the crowd without violence. Around 10:45 p.m., a commander at Bornholmer Strasse opened the gates to avoid mass riots. East Berliners were simply not going to take no for an answer after what Schabowski said. The apple that doomed humanity. Adam and Eve were placed in a beautiful garden and told not to eat the apple. But a few days later, Eve made the mistake of, just kidding guys. And that's all for today. If you liked the video, please hit that like button and make sure to subscribe if you want more history, mistakes, and explainer videos. See you in the next one.